A widowed billionaire saw his black maid nursing his baby. What he did next changed everything. When billionaire Julian Hart lost his wife during childbirth, his world stopped. He became a single father overnight to a newborn son, Leo, whom he loved more than life, but had no idea how to comfort. The mansion felt like a museum of loss. Quiet hallways that once echoed with his wife's laughter now stood silent. Julian returned to work within weeks, drowning himself in endless meetings just to avoid the pain waiting at home. Then he hired Tessa James, a gentle black woman with warm brown eyes and a natural way with children. She was a single guardian herself, raising her teenage brother after their parents passed. One stormy night, Julian returned home earlier than expected. The mansion was dark, except for a faint light glowing from the nursery. He walked closer and froze. There was Tessa, sitting in the rocking chair with baby Leo curled in her arms, drinking his bottle. She held him against her chest, gently patting his back and humming a lullaby so soft it seemed to calm the entire room. Leo wasn't just calm, he was completely peaceful. Julian couldn't remember the last time he saw his son that serene. Tessa noticed him, startled. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize you were home." He was crying so much, and Julian shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "No, please, continue." He stepped into the room slowly, chest tightening. The sight of her holding his child, caring for him with such genuine affection, hit something deep inside him. Tessa whispered, "He just needed to feel someone's heartbeat. Babies sense loneliness." Julian swallowed hard. "So, do adults?" For the first time since his wife's passing, someone looked at him with compassion, not pity. And in that quiet nursery, with his son finally at peace in her arms, something shifted in Julian's carefully guarded heart. Before we go deeper into this story, I want you to drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time is it. If you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Julian Hart had never imagined his life would look like this. At 38, he'd built Hart Industries from a small construction company into a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire, spanning 12 states. He'd married his college sweetheart, Elena, in a ceremony that felt like a fairy tale. 200 guests at a Connecticut estate, Elena radiant in vintage lace, their first dance to the same song they'd heard the night they met. They'd bought the mansion in the hills outside Hartford, filled it with art Elena collected, and the piano she played most evenings. They'd traveled Italy for their 5th anniversary, Japan for their 7th, always planning the next adventure while building the life they wanted at home. Then came the pregnancy they'd tried for years to achieve. 2 miscarriages had preceded it, making every week of Elena's 3rd pregnancy feel precious and terrifying. The careful monitoring because of her age and medical history, the nursery they decorated together in soft blues and creams, choosing every detail with the kind of care that came from nearly giving up hope. The name they'd chosen, Leo, meaning lion, because their son would be brave and strong like his mother. What Julian hadn't prepared for, what no amount of prenatal classes or parenting books could prepare him for, was the complications during delivery, the emergency C-section. The doctors working frantically while Julian paced in the surgical waiting room, praying to a God he'd stopped believing in years ago. The moment when a nurse had emerged with a crying newborn wrapped in blue blankets. "Your son is healthy, Mr. Hart, 9 pounds, 2 ounces, perfect APGAR scores," followed immediately by a doctor with devastated eyes. "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could, but your wife experienced severe hemorrhaging. We couldn't save her." Elena had died giving Leo life, and Julian had been left holding a newborn he'd never expected to raise alone, grief so profound he could barely breathe through it, let alone figure out how to parent an infant who needed constant care. The first months had been a blur of survival. Julian's mother had come from Florida initially, teaching him the basics of bottle feeding and diaper changes and infant sleep schedules that Leo rarely followed. But she was 72 with her own health issues and couldn't stay indefinitely. Julian had hired a rotation of professional nannies, capable, experienced women who cared for Leo efficiently, while Julian buried himself in work, using board meetings and acquisition deals as an escape from the empty mansion that still smelled like Elena's perfume. But something was wrong with the arrangement. Leo cried constantly despite being fed, changed, and medically healthy. The pediatrician assured Julian that some babies were just fussy, that Leo would likely grow out of it. But the nannies grew increasingly frustrated with an infant who couldn't be soothed, and Julian felt more disconnected from his son, each day loving him desperately but not knowing how to bridge the gap between them, how to be both mother and father to a child who seemed to sense the gaping absence in their lives. That's when Julian's executive assistant, Patricia, had suggested a different approach. Instead of rotating nannies, hire household staff, she'd advised during one of their daily briefings. Someone who's there every day, who becomes a consistent presence in Leo's life. Not just hired help cycling through, but part of his daily routine. Consistency matters for infants, especially ones dealing with trauma. The suggestion had made sense. Julian had interviewed several candidates over 2 weeks, mostly older women, with extensive childcare resumes and glowing references. But when Tessa James had walked into his office for her interview, something about her had immediately stood out. She was 28, with natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a professional but modest dress. Her resume showed years of childcare experience, babysitting since age 14, 2 years as a full-time nanny for a family in New Haven, current work at a daycare center. But what caught Julian's attention was her current life situation, which she'd explained with refreshing directness. "I'm raising my 16-year-old brother, Marcus," Tessa had said, meeting Julian's eyes steadily. "Our parents died in a house fire 2 years ago. I became his legal guardian. I'm working toward my RN degree through online courses at night, but I need daytime work that pays well enough to support us both and provides health insurance. Marcus has asthma and requires regular treatment." Julian had appreciated her honesty immediately, no pretense about her circumstances, no apologies for her needs, just clear communication about what she was managing and what she required from employment. "Why leave your current daycare position?" he'd asked. "The pay isn't enough to cover rent, Marcus's medical expenses, and my tuition," Tessa had replied. "I'm good at my work, I love children, but I need a position that actually supports my family while I complete my nursing degree. Your listing mentioned live-in with full benefits and competitive salary. That's what I need right now." Julian had offered her the position within minutes. Live-in staff with her own private suite, $75,000 annually plus benefits, flexible scheduling to accommodate her classes. Marcus could visit freely. The arrangement started the following Monday, and within days of Tessa moving into the mansion, everyone in the household noticed the transformation. The house felt different with Tessa in it. She moved through rooms with quiet purpose, humming old spirituals while she worked. She treated the mansion not like a museum to be preserved, but like a home to be lived in, opening windows to let fresh air circulate, arranging fresh flowers in the kitchen and living room, baking bread on weekends that filled the entire house with warm, yeasty comfort. But what truly changed everything was how she interacted with Leo. The baby who'd been perpetually fussy with professional nannies became calm in Tessa's presence. She talked to him constantly while working, explaining what she was doing in a gentle voice. "Mama's mixing your bottle now, sweetheart. Nice warm milk coming up. You're going to feel so much better once this tummy's full." She carried him in a soft wrap against her chest while cleaning, letting him feel her heartbeat and movement. She sang to him spirituals her grandmother had taught her, lullabies in a rich alto voice that seemed to wrap around Leo like a blanket. The difference was remarkable. Leo, who'd screamed through diaper changes with the nannies, lay peacefully while Tessa changed him, responding to her gentle narration. Leo, who'd fought sleep for hours, would drift off within minutes against Tessa's chest while she hummed and rocked. Leo, who'd seemed perpetually distressed for his first 4 months, was suddenly happy. Julian noticed these changes during his brief moments at home between business obligations, but the full magnitude hadn't hit him until that Thursday evening when he'd returned from a business dinner earlier than planned. He'd entered the quiet mansion around 9 p.m., loosening his tie as he'd headed upstairs. Most of the house was dark except for the soft glow emanating from Leo's nursery. Julian had approached silently, not wanting to interrupt if Leo was finally sleeping peacefully. But what he'd seen through the partially open door had stopped him completely. Tessa was sitting in the rocking chair, the one Elena had chosen, the one Julian couldn't bear to look at most days because it reminded him too sharply of plans that would never happen. She was holding Leo against her chest, one hand supporting his small body while the other gently rubbed his back in slow, soothing circles. The baby was drinking from his bottle with contented little sounds, his eyes drifting closed between sucks, his tiny hand clutching Tessa's shirt. But it was Tessa's expression that had stolen Julian's breath. She was looking at Leo with such pure tenderness, such genuine affection, humming a melody that wrapped around them both like a protective embrace. This wasn't an employee performing duties efficiently. This was someone who genuinely cared about the child in her arms, who found joy in soothing him, whose own heart seemed to soften watching him finally settle into peaceful rest. When Tessa had noticed Julian standing in the doorway, her eyes had widened with concern. I'm sorry, Mr. Hart. I didn't realize you were home early. He was crying so hard and wouldn't settle with just the bottle, so I thought holding him close might help. I hope that's okay. Don't apologize, Julian had managed, his voice rough with emotion he wasn't prepared to feel. Please, continue doing exactly what you're doing. He'd stepped into the nursery, moving to the cushioned window seat where he could observe without hovering. Tessa had resumed rocking Leo, her movements gentle and rhythmic. The storm outside had provided atmospheric backdrop, rain against windows, distant thunder rolling, the kind of weather that usually made Leo even fussier than normal. But Leo was peaceful. More than peaceful, he was utterly content in a way Julian had rarely seen since Elena's death. You have a real gift with him, Julian had said quietly after several minutes of comfortable silence. He just needed to feel someone's heartbeat, Tessa had replied, her voice soft. Babies sense loneliness and fear. When they feel isolated or scared, they cry because crying is their only language. But when they can hear a heartbeat, feel warmth and presence and gentle movement, they relax. It reminds them of the womb, of being completely safe and connected. Julian had felt something crack open in his chest. So do adults, he'd whispered before he could stop himself. The words had emerged unbidden, revealing more vulnerability than he'd intended. Tessa had looked up at him, then really looked at him, not with the professional courtesy staff usually showed employers, but with genuine understanding. And Julian had seen in her eyes that she comprehended his grief, his loneliness, his struggle to be everything Leo needed while barely holding himself together. Not pity, not judgment, just authentic recognition of his pain. Would you like to hold him? Tessa had offered after a moment. While I prepare his next bottle, I think he'd settle well with you right now. Julian had nodded, moving to take his son from her arms. The transfer had been seamless, practiced, and when Leo had settled against Julian's chest without fussing, when his small warm weight had relaxed trustingly into his father's hold, Julian had felt tears threatening. I don't know how to do this, Julian had admitted quietly, the vulnerability surprising even him. How to be everything he needs. Elena would have known instinctively. She would have been an amazing mother. I'm just barely managing. You're doing better than you think, Tessa had said gently from her position by the bottle warmer. You love him. You provide for him. You're here despite your grief, learning despite feeling overwhelmed. That's what he needs most, Mr. Hart. Not perfection, just presence. Just someone who cares enough to keep showing up. They'd stayed in the nursery together that night longer than necessary, Tessa showing Julian the specific hold she used that seemed to calm Leo most effectively, teaching him the humming rhythm that worked better than any lullaby, explaining the subtle differences between Leo's various cries so Julian could learn to interpret his son's needs. And Julian had felt something he hadn't experienced in the 5 months since Elena's death: hope. Not that his grief would disappear or that parenting would suddenly become easy, but that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to do this. That maybe Leo could thrive despite losing his mother. That maybe this woman who'd entered their lives could help them both navigate the impossible challenge of building a family from grief and loss. Over the following weeks, Julian found himself staying home more frequently. He'd schedule evening video conferences from his home office rather than going downtown. He'd return from business trips a day early, eager to see Leo rather than dreading the return to an empty, echoing mansion. He'd make excuses to be in whatever room Tessa and Leo occupied, watching how she interacted with his son, learning from her natural way of providing comfort and care. The household staff noticed the change. Julian's mother commented during their weekly phone calls that he sounded less exhausted, less haunted. Even Patricia, his assistant of 12 years, remarked that he seemed more present during meetings, less like he was going through motions while drowning internally. "You're spending more time at home," Patricia had observed during a phone briefing about quarterly projections. "That's good for you and Leo. The company can function without you being physically present 16 hours a day." What Patricia hadn't said, what Julian was barely willing to admit to himself, was that he wasn't just staying home for Leo anymore. He was staying home because Tessa was there. Because her presence made the mansion feel less like a tomb and more like a home. Because watching her with Leo reminded him that warmth and connection were still possible despite devastating loss. Because something about her grounded him in ways he didn't fully understand but desperately needed. One evening, about 10 weeks after Tessa had started, Julian had come home to find her sitting at the kitchen table with textbooks spread out, studying for a nursing exam, while Leo napped in his carrier beside her. She'd looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from working full days while raising a teenager and pursuing higher education simultaneously. "When do you actually sleep?" Julian had asked, genuinely concerned as he'd moved to start the coffee maker. Tessa had looked up with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "Between midnight and 5 a.m., usually. Marcus needs help with homework most evenings, and my online classes run from 8 to 11 p.m. I study whenever Leo naps during the day. That's 4, maybe 5 hours of sleep a night," Julian had said, turning to face her. "Tessa, that's not sustainable. You're going to burn out." "I'm managing," she'd replied, though the circles under her eyes suggested otherwise. "It won't be forever. Just until I finish my RN and can move into better-paying healthcare work. Then Marcus and I can have our own place again, and I won't need to work these kinds of hours." Julian had made a decision in that moment, one driven partly by practical concern for someone he'd come to rely on, but mostly by genuine care for Tessa as a person rather than just an employee. "I'm making some changes. First, I'm hiring a cleaning service 3 times a week. You'll supervise them, but you won't be responsible for maintaining the entire mansion yourself anymore. That should free up significant time." Tessa had opened her mouth to protest, but Julian had continued. "Second, I'm increasing your salary by 30% to match your actual responsibilities, which go far beyond basic household management. You're essentially co-parenting Leo at this point. You deserve compensation that reflects that reality." "Mr. Hart, that's incredibly generous, but..." "It's not generosity," Julian had interrupted gently. "It's fairness. Tessa, you're not just maintaining my house, you've transformed my son's quality of life. You've brought warmth back into this home. You're pursuing difficult education while supporting your brother through what I'm sure are complicated teenage years. You deserve recognition and resources that support all of that." Tessa had looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. "Thank you," she'd finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." They'd talked longer that evening about her nursing studies and career goals, about Marcus's struggles adjusting to high school after losing their parents, about the house fire that had killed Tessa's mom and dad and thrust her into sudden guardianship at 26. Julian had shared more about Elena, about the pregnancy complications, about his ongoing struggle to connect with Leo despite loving him fiercely. And somewhere in that conversation, Julian had realized he wasn't just grateful for Tessa's childcare abilities. He was drawn to her as a person, her strength in the face of overwhelming circumstances, her compassion that extended naturally to everyone around her, her quiet determination to build something better for herself and Marcus, despite loss and difficulty that would have broken many people. It wasn't romantic attraction, not yet, not consciously, but it was some shift in how he saw her, how she fit into his life, how much her presence mattered beyond just practical childcare assistance. 3 months after hiring Tessa, Julian's world had settled into new rhythms. Leo was thriving, hitting developmental milestones on schedule, laughing frequently, bonding deeply with both his father and Tessa. The mansion felt lived in again, Warm with Tessa's cooking and singing and the small personal touches, she'd added photos of Elena that Julian had packed away were back on display. Elena's favorite peonies appeared weekly in the living room vases. Julian had even started accepting social invitations again, business dinners, charity galas, the kinds of events he'd avoided since Elena's death. He always asked if Tessa wanted to join when events were family-friendly, wanting Leo to have consistent care rather than leaving him with unfamiliar sitters. It was at one such event, a children's hospital fundraising gala, where donors were encouraged to bring kids, that Julian's carefully controlled feelings had broken through his awareness with undeniable clarity. He'd been networking near the silent auction tables, Leo content in a carrier against his chest, when a business associate had approached. Richard Denning, a commercial real estate developer Julian had worked with on several projects. "Julian, good to see you out and about again," Richard had said warmly, genuine pleasure in his voice. "And this must be Leo. He's gotten so big. Elena would be so proud." "Thank you," Julian had replied, accepting the compliment without the sharp pain that had characterized his early months of grief. "It's been a challenging year, but we're finding our way." "And who's that beautiful woman helping with the coat check?" Richard had asked, gesturing across the room to where Tessa stood volunteering, looking elegant in a simple navy dress that Julian had insisted on buying for the occasion. Tessa had initially protested the expense, until Julian had pointed out that accompanying him to formal events was technically part of her job. Responsibility. "That's Tessa," Julian had said, following Richard's gaze. "She helps care for Leo and manages the household. She's lovely," Richard had said with obvious appreciation. "Single, by any chance?" Julian had felt something unexpected and powerful surge through him, something possessive and protective, and decidedly not platonic. "Yes, but mind if I ask her to dinner?" Richard had continued, apparently taking Julian's pause as permission. "I've been divorced 2 years now, getting back into dating. She seems like someone worth knowing." And Julian had realized with startling, undeniable clarity that yes, actually, he minded very much. The thought of Tessa dating Richard or anyone created an actual physical discomfort in his chest. The idea of her attention going to another man, of her potentially leaving his household to build a life with someone, of her smile being directed at someone other than him and Leo, all of it bothered him profoundly. Not because she was an employee he didn't want to lose, though that was part of it, but because somewhere over the past 3 months, Julian had developed feelings that went far beyond professional appreciation or friendly gratitude. He'd fallen for her, for Tessa James, the woman who'd brought his son peace and his home warmth and his grieving heart, the first genuine hints of healing since Elena's death. The realization had left Julian standing frozen at the fundraising gala, Richard waiting expectantly for an answer about pursuing Tessa, while Julian's entire understanding of his life and emotional landscape shifted dramatically. He was in love with his son's caregiver. The woman he'd hired to maintain his household and help with Leo had become someone he couldn't imagine living without, and Julian had absolutely no idea what to do about this revelation that changed everything. "Actually, Richard," Julian heard himself say, the words emerging with surprising firmness, "Tessa isn't available. It's complicated." Richard had raised his eyebrows, clearly intrigued. "Complicated how?" Julian had improvised quickly. "She works for me. It would be inappropriate for me to facilitate her dating my business associates. Creates uncomfortable dynamics." It was weak reasoning, and they both knew it, but Richard had nodded with understanding. "Fair enough. Well, if the situation changes, let me know." Then he'd moved on to discuss a potential property development, leaving Julian standing there with Leo, his heart pounding with the realization of what he'd just done. He'd essentially claimed Tessa, not officially, not explicitly, but enough to ward off Richard's interest. And the protective satisfaction Julian felt about that was undeniable. The rest of the gala had passed in a blur. Julian had gone through the motions of networking and small talk, but his awareness had remained fixed on Tessa across the room, the graceful way she moved, the warm smile she gave everyone she interacted with, the patient kindness she showed when a child spilled juice on her dress. When they'd finally left the event around 10 p.m., Leo asleep in his car seat. Julian had driven them home in silence, heavy with unspoken awareness. Tessa had seemed to sense his contemplative mood and hadn't tried to fill the quiet with conversation. Back at the mansion, after Tessa had settled Leo in his crib, Julian had found her in the kitchen making tea. He'd stood in the doorway watching her for a moment, this woman who'd become so integral to his life in just 3 months, whose presence had transformed his grieving house into something resembling a home again. "Tessa," Julian had said quietly, making her turn with surprise. "Mr. Hart, I thought you'd gone to bed. Is everything okay?" "Someone asked about you tonight," Julian had said, moving into the kitchen. "Richard Denning. He wanted to know if you were single, if he could take you to dinner." Tessa's expression had shifted surprise, then something careful and guarded. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you weren't available," Julian had admitted, "which was presumptuous of me. You're absolutely entitled to date whoever you choose. But Tessa, I need to be honest with you about something, even though the timing is terrible and this might make everything complicated." "What is it?" Tessa had asked, setting down her teacup with deliberate care. Julian had taken a breath, gathering courage. "I have feelings for you, romantic feelings. They've been developing since you started working here, though I didn't fully recognize them until tonight, when the thought of you dating someone else bothered me significantly. I know this is complicated given our professional relationship and the fact that Elena only died 8 months ago. I know you depend on this job and might feel pressured by me expressing this, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore." Tessa had been quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, "How long have you known?" "That I had feelings, really known and accepted it?" "Tonight," Julian had said honestly. "But looking back, I think I've been falling for you gradually since that first night I found you in Leo's nursery. Every conversation we've had, every time I've watched you with him, every moment I've come home and felt actual peace because you were here. It's been building toward this realization." "Mr. Hart." "Julian," he'd interrupted gently. "Please call me Julian, at least when we're alone." "Julian," Tessa had corrected, his name sounding different in her voice, more intimate somehow. "I don't know what to say. You're my employer. I live in your house. I care for your son. Even if I had feelings, which I'm not saying I do, acting on them would complicate everything." "I know," Julian had agreed, "which is why I'm not asking you to act on anything or make any decisions right now. I'm just being honest about where I am emotionally. You should know that my feelings exist, so you can decide how you want to handle the situation. If you want to maintain strictly professional boundaries, I'll respect that completely. If you want to find different employment because this makes you uncomfortable, I'll provide excellent references and help you transition however you need." "You'd let me leave?" Tessa had asked, something vulnerable in her question. "I don't want you to leave," Julian had said honestly, "but I want you to feel safe and comfortable more than I want my own desires fulfilled. Your well-being and Leo's well-being matter more than my romantic feelings. So yes, if you wanted to leave, I would support that decision, even though it would hurt." Tessa had studied him for a long moment. "Can I think about this? About all of it? What you've said? What it means? How I feel?" "Of course," Julian had assured her. "Take all the time you need. Nothing has to change unless you want it to." They'd parted that night with new awareness between them, the air charged with possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Over the following 2 weeks, things had remained professional on the surface. Tessa continued her usual routines with Leo, and Julian maintained appropriate boundaries. But underneath the normal rhythms of their days, something fundamental had shifted. Julian caught Tessa watching him sometimes, with an expression he couldn't quite read. She seemed more aware of him physically moving away when they got too close in the kitchen, avoiding his eyes during conversations, tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Julian worried he'd ruined everything with his confession. That Tessa felt uncomfortable now, trapped in a job she needed but burdened with her employer's unwanted romantic attention. Then, exactly 2 weeks after the gala, Tessa had knocked on Julian's home office door one evening after Leo was asleep. "Can we talk?" she'd asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Of course," Julian had said, closing his laptop immediately. "Come in. Sit down." Tessa had settled in the chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been thinking about what you told me, about your feelings, and I need to be honest with you about where I am." Julian had nodded, bracing himself for gentle rejection. "I have feelings for you too," Tessa had said, the words emerging in a rush. "I've been fighting them for weeks because they felt inappropriate. You're my employer. You're grieving your wife. Getting involved with you could jeopardize everything I've built here, my job, my stability, Marcus's security. It seemed selfish and risky to even acknowledge attraction. But," Julian had prompted when she'd paused, "but I can't stop thinking about you," Tessa had admitted. "About us, about whether something real could exist between us despite all the complications. Julian, you're not just my employer anymore. You're someone I genuinely care about. Someone who makes me laugh and challenges me and sees me as more than just household staff. And Leo," her voice had softened, "I love that little boy, not because it's my job, but because he's amazing and being part of his life feels like a privilege." "So, what do you want?" Julian had asked carefully. "I want to explore this," Tessa had said. "Carefully, slowly, with clear boundaries and honest communication. I want to see if these feelings we both have are real or just convenience and proximity. But Julian, if we do this, some things need to be clear up front." "Anything," Julian had agreed immediately. "First, Leo comes first, always. Whatever happens between us, his well-being and stability are the priority." "Absolutely," Julian had said without hesitation. "Second, I need to maintain some professional independence," Tessa had continued. "I want to keep working toward my nursing degree, keep building my own career path. Whatever relationship we develop, I can't be just your girlfriend or Leo's caregiver. I need to remain Tessa with her own goals and identity. I wouldn't want you any other way," Julian had assured her. "Third, we go slowly," Tessa had emphasized. "No rushing into anything. Elena died less than a year ago. You're still grieving. I'm still figuring out my life with Marcus. We take time to make sure this is real before we make any major commitments." "That sounds wise," Julian had agreed, though part of him wanted to rush forward immediately, to close the distance between them and claim what his heart had already decided it wanted. "And finally," Tessa had said, meeting his eyes directly, "if this doesn't work out, we handle it maturely. No making things awkward for Leo or creating an uncomfortable household. We'd need to figure out transition plans that prioritize his stability." "Agreed," Julian had said. "Tessa, those are all reasonable boundaries. I'm willing to honor every one of them. So, we're doing this? We're trying?" Tessa had smiled, then a genuine, warm smile that lit up her entire face. "We're trying." Their first official date had happened 3 days later. Julian had arranged for his mother to come stay overnight with Leo, wanting their first romantic outing to be just about them without parenting responsibilities intruding. He'd taken Tessa to a quiet restaurant in a neighboring town, somewhere they wouldn't run into business associates or people who knew him as the grieving widower. Over dinner, they'd talked for hours about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Julian had shared more about his relationship with Elena, about the guilt he felt moving forward so relatively soon after her death. "Do you think she'd be angry?" Julian had asked. "About me developing feelings for someone else?" Tessa had considered the question carefully. "From what you've told me about Elena, she sounds like she was generous and kind. Do you think she'd want Leo growing up in a house filled with grief and loneliness? Or do you think she'd want him surrounded by love and warmth, even if that meant you eventually finding happiness with someone new?" "She'd want Leo to be happy," Julian had said with certainty. "She'd want him to have a home filled with love." "Then maybe moving forward isn't betraying her," Tessa had suggested gently. "Maybe it's honoring what she would have wanted for both of you. You can love your past with Elena and still build a future with someone new. Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive." That perspective had helped Julian release some of the guilt that had been weighing on him. Elena was gone, but Leo was still here, still needing a warm and stable home. And Julian himself deserved the chance at happiness again, deserved the possibility of love that didn't erase his past, but created space for a different future. Over the following months, Julian and Tessa had built their relationship carefully. They dated when Julian's mother or a trusted sitter could watch Leo. They had long conversations after Leo went to bed, learning each other's stories and perspectives. They held hands while watching movies in Julian's home theater, shared stolen kisses in the kitchen when no one else was around, built intimacy gradually through small moments of connection. Marcus had visited one weekend around the 4-month mark of their relationship, and Julian had liked the teenager immediately. Smart, a bit shy, clearly devoted to his sister. Julian had taken them both to a basketball game, watching how Tessa's face lit up as she and Marcus cheered for their team, seeing a different side of her in her role as guardian and surrogate parent. "He's good for you," Marcus had told Tessa that evening when Julian had overheard them talking in the kitchen. "I've never seen you this happy, Tess. Not since Mom and Dad died." "I am happy," Tessa had admitted. "Julian's amazing. And Leo Marcus, I love that little boy so much. Being part of their lives feels right in ways I can't fully explain." "Then don't overthink it," Marcus had advised, with the straightforward wisdom teenagers sometimes possessed. "You've sacrificed so much for me the past 2 years. You deserve someone who treats you well and makes you happy." Julian clearly does both. 6 months into their relationship, Julian had asked Tessa to move from the staff suite into the master wing of the house, closer to his own bedroom. Not to live together in the same room, he'd clarified. "I know we agreed to go slowly, but I want you nearby. Want to be able to kiss you goodnight properly instead of saying goodbye at opposite ends of the hallway." Tessa had agreed, and the shift had felt significant, a public acknowledgement to household staff that their relationship had progressed beyond employer and employee. Julian had also increased Tessa's salary again, this time explicitly separating her compensation for childcare from her role as his romantic partner. "I don't want you ever feeling like you're being paid to date me," he'd explained. "Your work with Leo deserves fair compensation regardless of our personal relationship." By their 1-year anniversary marked from that gala night when Julian had first admitted his feelings, they'd built something solid. Leo was 15 months old now, calling Tessa Mama Tess, and clearly bonded to her as deeply as to Julian. Tessa had completed 2 more semesters of her nursing program, on track to finish her RN degree within 18 months. Marcus was thriving in his junior year of high school, visiting monthly and clearly happy his sister had found stability and love. On the evening of their anniversary, after a quiet dinner at home while Leo slept, Julian had taken Tessa out to the garden behind the mansion. It was late May, the Connecticut spring in full bloom. The garden Elena had designed, now maintained beautifully by landscapers, but infused with new life. Thanks to additions, Tessa had made a vegetable patch, herbs growing in neat rows, flowers chosen for their scent as much as their appearance. "I want to show you something," Julian had said, leading Tessa to a bench under the old oak tree where he'd spread blankets and pillows, creating a cozy outdoor space lit by string lights he'd hung that afternoon. "This is beautiful," Tessa had breathed, settling onto the blankets. "When did you do all this?" "While you were giving Leo his afternoon nap," Julian had said, sitting beside her. "Tessa, this past year has been the happiest of my life since Elena died. You've brought joy back into this house, love back into Leo's life, hope back into my heart. You've done all of this while pursuing your own education, raising Marcus, being patient with my grief and guilt. You're remarkable." "Julian," Tessa had started, but he gently pressed a finger to her lips. "Let me finish," he'd said. "I know we agreed to go slowly. I know it's only been a year, and in the grand scheme of things that's not very long. But Tessa, I'm certain about you, about us, about wanting to build a future together officially." He'd pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal an elegant diamond ring, not ostentatious, but beautiful and clearly expensive. "Tessa James, will you marry me? Will you officially become Leo's mother and my wife? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me this past year?" Tessa had looked at the ring with wide eyes, then at Julian, emotions clearly warring on her face. "Julian, God, yes, I'll marry you." Julian had slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with all the love and gratitude and joy he felt. When they'd broken apart, both were crying happy tears. "I love you," Julian had whispered. "I think I've loved you since that first night I found you with Leo, but I definitely know I love you now." completely and permanently. I love you too, Tessa had replied. I've been afraid to say it, afraid loving you meant somehow being disloyal to your past with Elena. But Julian, I love you. I love Leo. I want this family with everything in me. They'd married 3 months later in an intimate ceremony at the mansion, immediate family only, including Marcus as Tessa's man of honor and Leo as ring-bearer carried by Julian's mother, since he was still too young to walk reliably down an aisle. Elena's parents had attended at Julian's invitation, giving their blessing to his moving forward and welcoming Tessa into the family with genuine warmth. Elena would be happy you found someone who loves Leo like you do. Elena's mother had told Tessa during the reception she'd want her son raised with love. You're giving him that. Thank you. 2 years into their marriage, Tessa graduated with her RN degree. Julian had attended the ceremony with Leo, now 3.5, and excited to see Mama Tess get her special paper. Tessa had immediately been hired at a prestigious children's hospital, working in the pediatric ward 3 days a week, enough to build her nursing career, but not so much that she was away from Leo constantly. I'm so proud of you, Julian had told her that evening as they'd celebrated her graduation. You worked so hard for this, juggling so much to make it happen. You're incredible, Tess. I couldn't have done it without your support, Tessa had replied honestly. You gave me stability, resources, and encouragement when I was struggling. You believed in me pursuing my own career, even though it might have been easier for you if I'd just focused entirely on being Leo's mom. Thank you for that, Julian. Thank you for seeing me as more than just a caregiver or a wife. 3 years into their marriage, Tessa got pregnant. The news had been simultaneously joyful and complicated. Joyful because they both wanted more children. Complicated because Tessa worried about how Leo would adjust and whether she could manage her nursing career with a new infant. We'll figure it out together, Julian had assured her, just like we've figured out everything else. Leo will adjust. Your hospital will work with you on scheduling. And Tess, we can afford household help if we need it. You don't have to do everything alone. Their daughter, Elena Grace, named to honor Julian's late wife and Tessa's role in their lives, was born on a snowy December evening. Leo had been besotted with his baby sister from the moment he'd met her, declaring himself her protective big brother forever. Watching Tessa nurse their daughter in the same nursery where he'd first seen her with Leo, Julian had felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. From grief and loss to love and family, from employer and employee to husband and wife, from 2 broken people helping each other heal to partners building something lasting. 5 years into their marriage, with Leo starting 1st grade and Elena Grace approaching her 2nd birthday, they'd settled into rhythms that worked. Tessa continued her part-time nursing, loving the work, but also loving her time at home with their children. Julian had scaled back his business involvement somewhat, working mostly from home and delegating more to trusted executives so he could be present for school events and family dinners and bedtime routines. Marcus, now in his mid-20s and finishing his master's degree in education, visited regularly and had become Uncle Marcus to Leo and Elena Grace' beloved family, despite not being blood-related. One evening, while tucking Leo into bed, the boy had asked a question that had been clearly building for a while. Daddy, was there a mama before Mama Tess? Julian had glanced at Tessa standing in the doorway, and she'd nodded encouragingly. They'd known this conversation would come eventually. Yes, Julian had said gently, sitting on the edge of Leo's bed. There was. Her name was Elena, like your sister's middle name. She was my wife, and she was your first mama. She loved you so much, Leo, but she got very sick when you were born, and she died. That made me very sad. Did she go to heaven? Leo had asked, with a child's simple understanding of death. Yes, I think so, Julian had said. And from heaven, she sent Mama Tess to take care of you when you were a baby and needed someone. Mama Tess loved you and helped me learn to be a better daddy. And eventually, Mama Tess and I fell in love and got married, and she became your mama, officially. So I had 2 mamas? Leo had asked, processing this information. You did, Tessa had said, moving to sit on the other side of Leo's bed. Your first mama, Elena, who gave birth to you and loved you very much, even though she couldn't stay. And me, who loves you just as much and gets to watch you grow up. You're lucky, Leo. You have two mamas who love you, even if one is in heaven. I love you, Mama Tess, Leo had said, hugging her tightly. I'm glad heaven sent you to us. I'm glad too, sweetheart, Tessa had replied, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so glad. 10 years into their marriage, on the anniversary of that stormy night when Julian had first found Tessa nursing Leo in the nursery, they'd returned to that spot, the rocking chair still there, now used for Elena Grace and her younger brother, Julian Jr., who'd been born 18 months ago. Remember that night? Julian had asked, pulling Tessa close as they stood in the doorway of the nursery where their youngest was sleeping peacefully. Every detail, Tessa had said. I was so startled when you walked in, afraid you'd think I was overstepping by holding Leo like that instead of just giving him a bottle in his crib. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, Julian had admitted. This gentle woman holding my son with such tenderness, singing to him, giving him the comfort I hadn't known how to provide. That was the moment everything started changing for me. Tess, that was when I started falling in love with you, though I didn't recognize it for months. And look at us now, Tessa had said, gesturing to the evidence of their life together, 3 children, a home filled with warmth and laughter, careers they both loved, a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection. From employer and employee to this, it's been quite a journey. The best journey of my life, Julian had confirmed. Tessa, thank you, for seeing Leo's loneliness that first night and soothing it, for seeing my grief and helping me heal, for taking a chance on a complicated situation with a widowed billionaire and his infant son, for building this family with me. Thank you for letting me, Tessa had replied, for seeing me as more than just household staff, for supporting my education and career, for loving me and Marcus and making us part of your family. Julian, you gave me stability when I was struggling, but more than that, you gave me love I didn't know I deserved. Thank you for that. They'd kissed in that nursery doorway, the same spot where their story had really begun 10 years earlier. 2 people brought together by circumstances and a crying baby, who'd built something extraordinary through patience, communication, and genuine care for each other's well-being. From grief and loss had come love and family. From a stormy night had come a lifetime of warmth, and from a simple act of kindness, a woman nursing a baby who wasn't hers, a man recognizing the gentleness in that action, had come a marriage that proved sometimes the best relationships grow slowly, built on foundations of mutual respect and shared purpose before romance ever enters the picture. 15 years after that stormy night when Julian had first found Tessa nursing Leo in the nursery, they stood together at Leo's high school graduation. Their son, tall, confident, kind, walked across the stage to receive his diploma, and Julian felt Tessa's hand squeeze his as tears streamed down both their faces. Elena would be so proud, Tessa whispered, echoing a sentiment she'd expressed many times over the years. Never jealous of Julian's first wife, always honoring the woman who'd given Leo life, even though Tessa had raised him. She would, Julian agreed, and she'd be grateful Leo had you, that I had you. Leo was heading to Yale in the fall, planning to study architecture with dreams of joining Hart Industries someday and designing the buildings his father's company would develop. Elena Grace, now 13, was thriving in middle school, passionate about medicine like her mother, volunteering at the hospital where Tessa worked part-time. And Julian Jr., almost 11, was the family comedian, keeping everyone laughing with his quick wit and boundless energy. Marcus, now 32, had become a high school principal in Hartford, married with twin daughters of his own. He credited Tessa with giving him the stability and support that had made his success possible, and his family was woven into the fabric of the Hart family gatherings that happened monthly. After the graduation ceremony, during the family celebration at home, Leo had pulled Julian and Tessa aside. "I want to thank you both," he'd said, his young voice mature beyond his years. "Dad, for showing me what integrity and hard work look like. And Mum," he'd looked at Tessa, "for choosing to love me when you didn't have to, for being my mum in every way that matters. Leo, honey, I didn't choose to love you," Tessa had said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just did. From that first night when you were tiny and crying and I held you close, loving you wasn't a choice. It was inevitable. You made it easy. Still, Leo had insisted, you could have just been my caregiver. Instead, you became my mom. That means everything to me. The moment had encapsulated what their family had become, not defined by biology or conventional structures, but by choice and commitment and daily acts of love. 20 years after that transformative night, Julian and Tessa sat in the now quiet nursery that had cycled through all three of their children and was being converted into a home office. The rocking chair remained, though a piece of furniture neither could imagine removing. "Do you remember exactly what you were thinking that first night?" Tessa asked, settling into the chair that held so much history. "When you found me with Leo." Julian sat on the window seat, studying his wife of 17 years older now, with threads of silver in her natural hair, laugh lines around her eyes, the kind of beauty that came from a life well lived rather than preserved youth. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen," he admitted. "This gentle woman holding my son with such tenderness, giving him comfort I hadn't known how to provide. And I remember feeling something crack open in my chest, some wall I'd built around my grief, starting to crumble, because you were showing me that warmth and connection were still possible. I was terrified you'd be angry," Tessa recalled, "that you'd think I was overstepping by holding him like that instead of just feeding him efficiently. But when you said, 'Please continue,' when you looked at me with gratitude instead of judgment, something shifted for me too. I stopped seeing you as just my employer and started seeing you as a person, a grieving father doing his best in impossible circumstances." "When did you know," Julian asked, "that you had feelings for me?" Tessa thought carefully. "I think it was gradual, little moments accumulating. When you increased my salary to help with Marcus, when you asked about my classes and genuinely cared about my education, when you'd come home early just to spend time with Leo, not because you were checking my work, but because you wanted to be a present father. I saw your character in those actions, Julian, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being able to imagine my life without you in it." "I knew at that gala," Julian said, "when Richard asked about you and I felt possessive. That's when I had to admit what had been building for months. I'd fallen in love with you. It terrified me. I thought it was too soon after Elena, that I was betraying her memory, that my feelings might make you uncomfortable or jeopardize your job. But you told me anyway," Tessa said. "You were brave enough to be honest, even though it could have gone badly." "Because I couldn't keep it inside anymore," Julian admitted, "and because you deserved honesty. Tessa, you've always deserved honesty and respect, and someone who sees your full humanity. I'm grateful I was able to give you that. I'm grateful you gave it back to me." 25 years after that night, a quarter century since Julian had found Tessa nursing his infant son, they renewed their vows in a ceremony attended by their 3 adult children. 4 grandchildren. Leo and his wife had 2, Elena Grace had recently had twins, Marcus's family, and the extended community they'd built over decades. 25 years ago, you walked into my life when I needed you most," Julian said in his renewed vows, his voice strong despite his 63 years. "You brought my son peace. You brought my home warmth. You brought my heart healing I didn't think was possible after Elena's death. Tessa, you've been my partner in raising 3 incredible children, in building a family that honors both my past and our present, in creating a life filled with more love and joy than I ever imagined having again. You've pursued your own dreams while supporting mine. You've maintained your identity while joining your life to mine. You're remarkable, and I'm grateful for every single day I've spent as your husband. Julian, when I took that job 25 years ago, I needed stability," Tessa said in her renewed vows, her own voice strong at 60. "I needed a way to support Marcus while finishing my education. I got all of that, but I also got so much more. I got a son to love in Leo, who became mine in every way that matters. I got a partner who respected my ambitions and supported my growth. I got a family that accepted me completely. And I got a love I'd stopped believing was possible, the kind that weathers storms and celebrates joys and just keeps deepening year after year. Thank you for seeing me as more than just household staff. Thank you for falling in love with the real me. Thank you for building this extraordinary life with me. After the ceremony, Leo gave a toast that captured what their family meant to everyone gathered. "My parents' story isn't conventional," he said, raising his glass. "Dad was my mum's employer before he was her husband. Mum became my mother by choice, not biology. But their relationship has taught me that family isn't defined by how it begins, it's defined by how it endures. Dad and Mum built something real from complicated circumstances. They chose each other consciously and keep choosing each other every day. That's what love actually looks like." 30 years after that transformative night, Julian and Tessa sat on their back porch, now in their late 60s and early 70s, retired from their respective careers, but still deeply involved in their children's and grandchildren's lives. Leo ran Hart Industries now, with Elena Grace serving as the company's Director of Community Health Initiatives and Julian Jr., managing sustainable development projects. 30 years, Tessa marveled, leaning against Julian as they watched the sunset. 3 decades since that stormy night when you found me with Leo. Can you believe it? Barely, Julian admitted. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like we've always been together, like I can't remember what life was like before you. What do you think you'd tell that version of yourself? Tessa asked, the grieving widower standing in the nursery doorway, watching a stranger comfort his son. Julian considered this carefully. I'd tell him that the woman holding his son is going to change everything, that she'll help him heal without erasing his past, that she'll give Leo the mothering he desperately needs, that she'll become his partner in building a family that honors Elena's memory while creating something new and beautiful. I'd tell him to be patient, to be honest about his feelings when they develop, to trust that love can exist again after devastating loss. And what would you tell the woman in that rocking chair? Julian asked. The 28-year-old guardian trying to build stability for herself and her brother? I'd tell her that accepting this job will change her life in ways she can't imagine, Tessa said, that the baby she's holding will become her son in every way that matters, that the grieving father watching from the doorway will become her husband and partner, that she'll find not just employment, but family, not just stability, but genuine love. I'd tell her to be brave enough to accept what's being offered, both the practical support and eventually the emotional connection. That accepting help isn't weakness, and falling in love again isn't betrayal of anything she's lost. They sat in comfortable silence, both reflecting on the extraordinary journey from that single moment to this life they'd built, from employer and employee to husband and wife, from grief and struggle to joy and stability, from 2 broken people to partners who'd healed together while building something that would outlast them both. The best decision I ever made, Julian said, was that night asking the flight attendant to bring warm water so you could properly prepare Leo's bottle, because that simple action started a conversation that led to everything that followed. The best decision I made, Tessa countered, was accepting your job offer despite my initial concerns, and then later accepting your proposal despite all the complications. You were worth every risk, Julian. This family was worth every uncertainty. 35 years after that night, they gathered the entire extended family, children, grandchildren, Marcus's family, Elena's parents, now elderly but still part of their lives, and the community they'd built for a celebration at the Hart Mansion. The house that had once been a museum of grief was now filled with life and laughter and evidence of love accumulated over decades. Leo gave a speech honoring his parents. 35 years ago, my dad found my mom nursing me in the nursery during a storm. He was a grieving widower. She was household staff. Nobody would have predicted they'd fall in love, get married, build this family. But they did. And their relationship taught all of us, their children, their grandchildren, everyone who knows them, that family can be built from the most unlikely beginnings. That love can grow from professional relationships if there's mutual respect. That accepting help when you need it creates opportunities for transformation. Mom and Dad, thank you for showing us what real partnership looks like. Thank you for building a family that's made all of us better. Elena Grace added her own toast. I'm named after 2 incredible women, my dad's first wife, Eleanor, who I never met, but who gave my brother life, and my mom, Grace, whose middle name I carry. Mom has never tried to erase Elena's memory or pretend she didn't exist. Instead, She's honored her by raising Leo with so much love, by keeping Elena's photos displayed, by teaching us all that we can love and remember people we've lost while still building new lives. That generosity of spirit defines who Mom is. We're all lucky to be part of her family. Julian Jr., the family comedian, even in serious moments, added with characteristic humor. Plus, Mom makes the best Sunday dinners and Dad tells terrible jokes, so really they complement each other perfectly. Here's to 35 more years of Mom's cooking and Dad's puns. The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, the kind that only comes from family who genuinely enjoy each other's company. 40 years after that transformative night, Julian passed away peacefully in his sleep at 78. He'd lived to see all 3 children established in successful careers, had known 8 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, had built a life of meaning and purpose that extended far beyond business success. At his funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives he'd touched: employees from Hart Industries, families helped by the charitable foundation he and Tessa had established, friends and extended family, community members who'd known him as more than just a wealthy businessman. But it was Tessa's eulogy that captured who Julian had truly been. 40 years ago, my life changed because a grieving widower was kind to his household staff, Tessa said, her voice steady despite obvious emotion. Julian found me nursing his infant son during a storm, and instead of seeing an employee overstepping boundaries, he saw someone caring for a child who needed comfort. That moment of recognition of seeing humanity rather than just roles and hierarchy defined who Julian was. He was a successful businessman, yes, Tessa continued. He built an empire, employed thousands, left a legacy in the literal buildings his company constructed. But Julian's real legacy is the lives he touched personally. He saw me when I felt invisible. He supported my education while I worked for him. He eventually fell in love with me despite all the complications that created. He raised 3 children with me, one who wasn't biologically his, but whom he loved as fiercely as the 2 we created together. He built a family that honored his past while embracing our present. Julian taught me that grief doesn't have to be permanent, Tessa said. That accepting love after loss isn't betrayal. That moving forward can coexist with remembering what came before. He showed me what real partnership looks like: supporting each other's dreams, respecting each other's needs, choosing each other consciously day after day. I loved him completely. I'm grateful for every year we had together, and I'll carry him in my heart for whatever years I have remaining. Leo added his own memories. Dad could have been just a grieving father who hired staff to manage his son. Instead, he became my true father, present, engaged, teaching me integrity and compassion through example rather than just words. When he married Tessa, he didn't replace my biological mother. He honored her by giving me a family filled with love. That generosity, that capacity to hold space for complicated truths, defined him. Tessa lived another 12 years after Julian's death, remaining active in their children's and grandchildren's lives, continuing the charitable foundation work they'd built together, staying connected to the community they'd served for decades. She never remarried, telling people that Julian had been her once-in-a-lifetime love, and she was content with the family and memories they'd created. When Tessa passed at 84, surrounded by her 3 children and several grandchildren, her funeral drew an equally large crowd. Medical colleagues from her nursing career, families she'd helped through the foundation, community members, and countless people whose lives had been touched by the love story she and Julian had built from that unlikely beginning. At her funeral, Elena Grace gave the eulogy. "My mother didn't give birth to my oldest brother," Elena Grace said, "but she chose to love him when she could have just done her job efficiently. She didn't have biological connection to Leo, but she gave him everything a mother should: comfort, guidance, unwavering support, unconditional love. That capacity to love beyond biology, beyond obligation, that defined who Tessa was. Mom taught me that family is built through daily choices," Elena Grace continued, "through showing up consistently, through supporting each other's dreams, through choosing compassion over judgment. She showed me that accepting help isn't weakness, and that offering help creates connections that transform lives." Mom and Dad's relationship, built from a professional arrangement, complicated by grief and power dynamics, transformed into something lasting and beautiful, taught all of us that love can grow from the most unexpected places if you're brave enough to pursue it. Leo added his final goodbye to the woman who'd raised him. That stormy night 52 years ago when Tessa held me in the nursery while I cried, humming lullabies and giving me the comfort my grieving father didn't yet know how to provide, that night changed everything. For me, for Dad, for our entire family. Tessa became my mother by choice. She loved me fiercely and unconditionally. She built a family with Dad that honored his past while creating our present. Everything good in my life traces back to that moment when Tessa chose compassion over efficiency, when she saw a crying baby and decided to offer genuine comfort rather than just professional care. Mom, thank you for that night and every day that followed, for raising me, for loving Dad, for building this family. I'll carry you in my heart forever. 50 years after that transformative night, the Hart family gathered at the mansion, now owned by Leo, but still maintained as the family's gathering place to commemorate the anniversary of Julian and Tessa's first meeting. 3 generations came together to share the story that had become family legend. Tell us about the night Grandpa found Grandma with Uncle Leo, one of the great-grandchildren requested, using the family terminology that had evolved over decades. And so they told the story one more time, how a grieving billionaire widower had found his household staff nursing his crying infant son during a storm. How that simple moment of witnessing genuine compassion had planted seeds that would eventually grow into love. How 2 people from vastly different circumstances had built a family that lasted over 40 years and touched countless lives beyond just their own. The lesson, Leo told his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, isn't that employers should marry their staff or that professional relationships always become romantic. The lesson is that seeing people's full humanity, regardless of their position or role, creates possibilities for genuine connection. Grandpa saw Grandma as more than just an employee. Grandma saw Grandpa as more than just a wealthy employer. They saw each other as complex people deserving of respect and care. That mutual recognition created the foundation for everything that followed. And they lived happily ever after? One young great-grandchild asked, with the simplicity children bring to complex stories. They lived fully ever after, Elena Grace corrected gently, with challenges and joys, complications and celebrations, grief and growth. Their happiness wasn't about everything being perfect. It was about choosing each other consistently, supporting each other's dreams, building something meaningful together despite the obstacles. That's what real love looks like, not perfect, but persistent, not easy, but worth it. The family gathered in the nursery where it had all begun, the rocking chair still there after 5 decades, preserved as a family heirloom, and they understood that the real legacy of Julian and Tessa wasn't the wealth Julian had accumulated or even the charitable foundation they'd built together. The real legacy was the family they'd created, 3 children raised with love, grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their values forward, and the countless lives touched by their example of what's possible when grief meets compassion, when professional boundaries transform into genuine connection, when 2 people are brave enough to build something real from the most unlikely beginning. From a stormy night and a crying baby and a woman nursing a child who wasn't hers came a family that would span generations. From an employer and employee came a partnership that proved love can grow in unexpected places. From loss and grief came healing and joy. And it all started because one woman chose compassion over efficiency, and one man recognized that compassion for what it truly was, a glimpse of the extraordinary person who would eventually become his partner in building a life worth living.